Good morning. This is the time and place for the zoning cases hearing February 6, 2019. My name is Bradley Collin, and I will be conducting the hearing as a hearing officer. We have one case scheduled for today, and the relevant exhibits are posted on the panels located directly behind me. If you wish to speak, please write your name and address on one of the green speaker forms, which have been provided by the front door and submitted to our planning assistant. I'd like to inform everyone that the official proceedings of the planning hearing officer's meeting or hearing are recorded as part of the public record. Notification of this hearing was accomplished by the use of public notices which were mailed to property owners and occupants located within 500 feet of the subject property, physically posted on the site in question, and placed in the local newspaper. The hearing will proceed as follows. I'll read the description of the application. The case planner will then make a brief overview of the case, give an analysis, make a recommendation. The applicant will be asked to come forward stating both name and address and will be asked to present the case within a 15-minute time limit. Others in support of or opposition to the application and interested parties will be then asked to come forward to speak, again, clearly stating name and address within a 3-minute time limit. And lastly, the applicant will be given the opportunity to make closing comments if desired in response to testimonies given by preceding speakers with a 5-minute time limit. The hearing will be closed and the case either taken under submission or decision may be made. If the evidence presented in the application and the hearing meets the required findings, the hearing officer can either approve or impose conditions for approval on the case in question. If the findings, in fact, are not evident, then the case will be denied. The case we have before us today is a density bonus housing plan, case number PDBP 1823423, located at 2817 Montrose Avenue. The applicant is requesting approval for a density bonus to construct a new three-story 38-unit multifamily affordable housing project with 2 concessions and incentives and 2 waivers or modifications pursuant to Government Code Section 65915 and the Glendale Municipal Code Section 30.36 in the R1650 medium density residential zone, described as lots 3 and 4 in tract number 2718 in the city of Glendale. At this time, I would like to hear from Ms. Dematitis, our case planner.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Collins, members of the public. As was just mentioned, this is a density bonus case for a project located at 2817 Montrose Avenue. The applicant is requesting a density bonus for a 38-unit, 3-story multifamily residential project. And I'm going to go into the various points both in terms of our zoning code and in terms of the state's density bonus, because this is an SB 1818 project. So many of the state statutes apply to this and grant relief for this affordable housing project on top of what is being requested for the project in terms of the zoning code, the city's zoning code. So with that said, I'd also like to start out that this project, in terms of environmental review, was determined to be exempt under the California Environmental Quality Act CEQA review as a Class 32 infill development project. And just to give a brief background as well, the lot itself is a 36,000 square foot lot. It's a parallelogram shaped. It's mid-block on the northern side of Montrose Avenue. Currently it features Unity Church. It's a 6,300 square foot chapel constructed in 1955. In addition to the church and the surrounding buildings, it has a surface parking lot, and it has obviously been that way for a number of decades. The church has been deemed not to be historical, and it will be demolished to make way for the project. The surrounding uses are multifamily residential along Montrose. The property itself, as is the neighborhood, is zoned R1650, which is a medium-high density residential zone. Surrounding properties include 1-, 2-, and 3-story multifamily residential uses, and the properties directly to the north are actually in the county of Los Angeles. Those are single-family homes, but they are in the county of Los Angeles. The border of the city is the rear property line of the project site. Just to give a quick, brief proposal summary, the applicant is requesting 2 concessions or incentives. The first is to increase the maximum height to 56 feet, and 3 stories are permitted by right. And this is greater than obviously permitted 36 feet, 3 stories permitted in the R1650 zone. So for a flat roof, they're permitted 36 feet, and they are requesting 56. The concession number 2 would be to decrease the minimum required interior setbacks. They're proposing a minimum interior setback of 5 feet and an average of 6 feet along the east, a minimum interior setback of 6 feet and an average of 14 feet along the north, that would be along the rear property line, and a minimum interior setback of 5 feet and an average of 16 feet along the west. In the R1650 zone, there is a 5-foot minimum, 8-foot average for the first floor, an 8-foot minimum, and 11-foot average for the second residential floor. These would be the 2 concessions. Now, these are precluded by the state, and we are required by state law to grant these concessions for an affordable housing project. The applicant is requesting 2 waivers, and that is what is being heard today by the planning hearing officer. The 2 waivers are 2 additional modifications, include an increase in the maximum allowable floor area ratio of 1.14, and this would be for the habitable space only. And if you were to include the at-grade garage, which according to our zoning code has to be counted towards floor area ratio. Only subterranean or semi-subterranean garages are not counted towards floor area ratio. If you were to include the garage, it would be 1.78 for an FAR. The second requested waiver is to increase the maximum allowable lot coverage to 53%. This would be for the living area only. So if you were to take only the building footprint would be 53%, whereby code has a maximum of 50%. If you were to include the at-grade garage in this case, the lot coverage would be 74%. So, which brings me to the required findings. The density bonus has required findings for the city of Glendale, and this is per the Glendale zoning code section 30.36080. Director, we obviously have to make findings based on the substantial evidence. With regards to the approval, it would be, the first finding would be that the incentive or concession does not result in unidentifiable or actual cost reductions to provide for affordable housing costs or to provide affordable rents, which in this case, the concessions do lend to the affordability of the project. Second one would be that the incentive or concession would have a specific adverse impact upon public health and safety, and again, this would be public health and safety as defined in the government code. In this case, again, it was found to not have a specific adverse effect on the public and health and safety code due to the additional height and reduced setbacks. And the third was that the incentive or concessions will be contrary to the state or federal law, and again, by providing the affordability of the project for the additional units and still maintaining a height that is geared towards the topographical slope of the project site and reduced setbacks that still provide some sort of separation between the adjacent units, it was not found to be contrary to the state and federal law. Now, in regards to the two modifications of development standards, the hearing officer has to grant the request for waivers or reductions in development standards only, or if he or she makes all of the required findings. The first would be that the application of the development standards will have the effect of precluding construction of the housing development at the density and with the incentives and concessions granted. It was noted in the staff report that these concessions, excuse me, that these waivers are required in order to provide for the affordability. The second, that the requested waiver or reduction in the development standards will not have a specific adverse impact, again, as defined on the public by the government code in regards to health, safety, and physical environment. The third would be that the waiver or reduction in development standards will not have an adverse impact on any real property that's listed in the Glendale, in the California Register of Historical Resources, which in this case the property is not. And the last, that the waiver of reduction in development standards will not be contrary, again, to state or federal law. So these are the required findings per the zoning code in conjunction with the section in the California government law. I'd like to go into just a little bit of detail with regards to the affordability of the project and the density bonus itself. The project is located in R1650 zone. By code, they would be allowed 1 unit for every 1,650 square feet of lot area. Again, this is a 36,000 square foot lot. And they are allowed to, by the zoning code, to go down to a density of 1 unit for every 1,320 square feet of lot area. And these would be for projects located on a frontage greater than 90 feet in width. Based on the land use designation and the lot width, by code, and total of 27 or 27.3, which would be rounded up to 28 units, would be permitted as the base density. The applicant is providing 3 very low income units, and in which case the state and the zoning code would then allow them to a density bonus of 32.5%, which would allow for an additional 10 units above the baseline for a total of 38 units. So that is what they are proposing at this point. The project will include a density bonus housing agreement that is subject to the hearing officer and the city attorney, and it would require long-term affordability for a period of 55 years. The requested concessions, as I sort of mentioned briefly during the findings discussion, are required in this case to address the significant slope differential on the lot, which impacts the allowable height, and also to allow the additional area to provide more units that would reduce the cost of the developer by providing those additional affordable housing units. The savings that the developer realizes will be significant and will allow the affordable housing cost to be reduced. And the additional height and reduced minimum and average interior setbacks will allow for the larger apartment units to attract longer-term tenants to the project, would minimize the unit turnover, and to distinguish the project from the large number of smaller market rate units within the city. These deal, again, with the requested concessions that would be granted by state law as well. Now, in regards to the 2 additional waivers, these would be the increase of floor area to 1.14 for the living area and 1.78 if you were to include the garage parking. And then also for the increase in the maximum allowable lot coverage to 53% for the living area or the building footprint of the habitable space, and 74% for the area that includes the garage, when a maximum allowable lot coverage is 50%. These 2 modifications, in addition to the 2 concessions, are found to be compliant with the government code 65915 and the GMC section 3036, which governs density bonus waivers. The requested waiver to exceed the maximum FAR standard is necessary to accommodate the added floor area of the 10 additional units that are permitted under the density bonus law, in addition to the 28 baseline residential units. It's also to address, again, as mentioned, the at-grade parking, because parking under our zoning code, if it's not subterranean or semi-subterranean, is counted towards that. I'd like to just go up to the, if you don't mind, to the plans and just point out the sections that I'm referring to.
That's fine, thank you.
So, I'm going to use actually this slide. So as you see, it is an unusual lot. It is parallelogram shape versus the standard rectangular multifamily residentially zoned lots in the city. The street here would be on Montrose Avenue. Again, this is the rear property line, which is a private easement, and then which would essentially be LA County at the rear. They have an unusual set of circumstances because they actually have a large oak tree that they are maintaining on the property. There is a code condition of approval actually that's included in your staff report that, and the developers are actually building around this oak tree, so it will be maintained. There's also an existing river rock wall along the front property line that is also going to be maintained, incorporated within the project. So these two features affect the development at the front of the property, and both, again, will be preserved. The lot from the street to the rear has a 25-foot differential. So you'll notice here on these elevation drawings, it's more evident, so that if you come from the street with the river rock wall and go up to the back, there's a 25-foot difference from front to rear. If this was a flat lot, they would be able to go ahead and meet the height limit, because of obviously they wouldn't be dealing with such a significant slope grade change across the lot. But because they are staggering the lots or staggering the actual project itself, since the height definition requires us to take the height from the lowest point where the project comes out of the ground to the top of the very highest point, you'll notice that there is a resulting change, and they are requesting that as well. Now, in terms of the floor area and the lot coverage, and when you take a look at the building footprint, again, as I noted here, the building, this particular site, the building footprint would be only these three areas. It's essentially three building forms. So it'd be this building form along the east, at the rear, and along the west. If you were to take the calculation and total of those areas, it would be 53%, when a 50% is the maximum permitted in the R1650 zone. And I'm going to go back here. This would be the parking plan, and if you were to take the entire parking grade, which in this case is built into the hillside because of the slope differential, instead of going down even further and having additional grading, they are simply grading and going straight into the garage. But though the parking would essentially be under the grade at the rear, it's considered at grade because of where the street location is. And so to prevent any additional grading or going down even further, they are building it at grade, and that parking is counted towards the floor area ratio according to the definition of our zoning code. So the requested waiver for the FAR maximum is necessary to accommodate the additional 10 units permitted under the density bonus law, and the parking garage that is being built at grade into the hillside. If the project was to comply with the FAR maximum, the project essentially would be penalized with excessive grading to provide the subterranean parking that would not count towards FAR, and also smaller residential units, making them less attractive to renters and to families in the area, and economically infeasible essentially for the affordable project and its construction costs. Furthermore, the reduced interior setbacks and the waiver for increased FAR result in a greater lot coverage for the project site. And so it's a intuitive, one causes the other versus the other. So they are going for 2 of the waivers. Without the waivers requested, the development standards would have the effect of precluding the construction of the housing development at the density and with the incentives and concessions granted. So further details again went into great details and great length in the staff report and in the findings. I'd like to also point out that the parking concessions that are being granted for this project, again, those are state concessions that are also repeated in the city's chapter, density bonus chapter, with regards to the number of parking. So the number of parking per code and per the state density code would be 70 spaces. The parking is provided, 70 spaces on site, so it meets the required state minimums for this affordable housing project. So in addition to the reduced ratios for the number of bedrooms, the state limits us and says that we cannot require guest parking on site, so the project is not providing guest parking on site. And the state law, as well as repeated in our density bonus provisions, allows for at-grade parking. So essentially they would allow for at-grade parking or unenclosed garage parking. In this case, they are providing garage parking at grade, which would be permitted, because that's another reason typically this would be a variance item to provide at-grade parking for multifamily residential uses for an additional story. In this case, it doesn't count as an additional story because the state precludes us from having to count as, or does allow for this to be at-grade parking and not counted as a story. And also, lastly, they are permitted to have tandem spaces according to the state law. They are providing 29 of the 70 parking spaces as tandem, in a tandem configuration, but those tandem spaces would be for the same unit. So the same unit would have both the front and the rear parking. So it should not be a problem in terms of accessibility. So staff ultimately believes that the required findings to deny the incentives and concessions for the increased height and the decreased interior setbacks cannot be made. Meanwhile, the findings required for the waivers, for the 2 requested waivers and modifications from the development standard, which would be the increased floor area ratio and the increased lot coverage, can be made to support approval of the proposed projects. That concludes staff's presentation. Thank you for bearing with us to go into greater details, but it's a very complicated project, and I know there were a number of individuals who contacted me with regards to questions for this density bonus because, again, it's a combination of both state law and then the zoning code. There was one letter that was received in opposition to the project, and you have that on the dais. And I actually met with the condo owner representative for the project to the east, and this would be, I'm gonna go in. So it would be the condominium project to the east, located closer to La Crescenta Avenue. So I met with one of the owner's representatives. And that is it. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those. And I know the applicant and the project architect are in the audience as well.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Semititis. You actually answered the 2 questions that I had. I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. The first speaker that we have is Armand Harapachin. Please remember to state your name and address for the record, please. If there's anybody else too in the audience that would wish to speak today, please fill out one of these cards if you haven't already and get it to our plant staff.
My name is Armand Harapachin. My address is 16 Tasman C, Newport Coast, California. I just wanted to give you a background on the project and kind of walk you through what I've gone through from the beginning to this point. So I purchased this first of all, even though I live in Newport Beach, I grew up in Glendale, not very far from this property on Verdugo and Hillside, and I'm very familiar with the area and very sensitive to the type of architecture that fits in that area. The reason that I purchased the property is because I know the area, I know the school district, and I really like the location. And I also, my family owns property in that area in Honolulu, so I'm very, very familiar with the area. And the goal was to basically develop this into housing development. I did a study, I went through different options that we can put on this property, townhomes to non-affordable housing units and affordable housing units. And basically, the other two, without having housing, affordable housing, the projects would not be economically feasible. As it was mentioned, the type of the topography that we're dealing with, it just makes it very difficult for these to be anything but what we are proposing right now, which is having being able to build on grade, not go under, not go subterranean, and provide affordable housing. So once I figured that out, I asked around and I tried to find an architect that really understands the topography and has done projects in the neighborhood. And I was fortunate to find Garo, who has done projects in that area, and it's actually won architectural design awards for some of the work that he has done. Actually won on Piedmont, which is not very far from here. And I was fortunate to be able to find him and work with him. And Garo has also done projects for that have affordable housing components, so I was very familiar with the concept. So together we started working on the plans, and we were working with the city for the past year and a half almost on this project, and working through all the details to get this thing approved. So as was mentioned, we're trying to maintain the the look of the property and make it conform with the neighboring structures. So we're maintaining the river rock wall, we're maintaining the oak tree, and we have had several meetings with the homeowners association, and we've taken their inputs on what kind of architecture would fit in that neighborhood, and we've made modifications to the original plans so that this this architecture fits in that neighborhood. So without any more comments, I'd like to invite Garo to go to the details.
Next speaker I have Garo Manassian.
Good morning, Garo Manassian, 140 Akari Drive, Los Angeles 90049. I'm the architect of the project, and when Armand contacted me, we had history on what attempts were made to develop the site by different people who had looked at it, and none of them seemed to have worked. And so Armand asked me, what do you think we should do? And I suggested to him that a density bonus, a rental project, would probably be the most suitable. And I suggested that it can be done, and it could be done in such a way that it is compatible with the neighborhood. And basically, I had to create a project that he was comfortable with and analyzed from the developer's standpoint to determine if it's feasible, and feels that unless some drastic changes happen in the economy, this project can go ahead and be built and be self-supporting and so forth. Today's environment is such that developing has become very difficult, especially apartment development, with the cost of construction that has skyrocketed. The interest rates have edged up, and land values are very high. So my prognosis is that, projection is that next year, the year following that, you're going to see less and less development happening. My practice is got a sort of a thumb on the environment of the developers, and they're having difficulty coming up with projects that will happen in the future. So that in some way explains why a density bonus project is pretty much the answer to what can be done today in this environment. One of the first things I needed to look at was what the site is and how we can design this in a compatible manner. So height was of concern because of the topography and the definition of height in the zoning code. However, every property that has been developed along that north side of Montrose has had to deal with the height issue, and the buildings do step up. So our neighbors to the east have the same height differential from the front to the back that we are proposing. So is the building on the west to a lesser extent because it's a two-story, whereas the building on the east side has 3 levels. And every time we deal with a uphill site in Glendale, we either have to go through a variance to explain the difficulty that we encounter building a garage that would qualify as a semi or a subterranean garage, because the definition is very onerous. It says the top of the garage cannot be more than 4.5 feet above the curb elevation, and that basically is lower than the top of the rock wall that exists now there at the front. So even though we are getting a height incentive, it is otherwise not denied to any other project that exists on the north side of Montrose. They've all had that privilege. Our project, though, does have some amenities that other projects don't have, the ones to the east and the west of us, which is a significant open space. We've got a courtyard down the middle of the property that all the units are oriented to that open space. So in terms of privacy, we have chosen to put bedrooms on the exterior of the building and put the living spaces on the inside of the building, facing the courtyard, the central courtyard, and therefore the impact on the neighbors would be far less because there's no living activity happening along the side yard. It's basically just windows that provide light and ventilation for the bedrooms. The front of this project would be very attractive because it's a two-story proposed element that sits at grade. The garage is pushed back behind those front 6 units, and the landscaping will be therefore in natural ground. The oak tree will be maintained. The rock wall will be actually expanded because it will we will close up the east driveway. We will only use the west driveway for access to our parking. The other obviously opportunity here is to provide attractive architecture in a new building. That would be an amenity and a plus to the neighborhood, because many of the buildings that were built earlier did not have to go through design review and go through the intricacies of providing attractive and acceptable architecture. The obviously, to be able to do low density, to be able to do very low income units, there has to be compensating and supporting economics, and that would be by providing some additional units, because the units that are going to be rented at very low income will not pay for the cost of creating them, and they would have to be subsidized by some additional units. That's how the density bonus program works. The waivers, if we focus on the waivers, they're really there because of the subterranean definition of the garage. Because if we were just looking at the living areas, which sit on top, pretty much the variation from the code is minimal. 1 is to 1.4 and so forth. So we're not requesting a significant change from what would normally be the underlying FAR and the lot coverage. That's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker I have is Dolores Machicado.
Good morning, Mr. Cullen. My name is Dolores Machicado, and I live in the condominium next to this project. I live in number 4.
East side or the west side?
We live on the east side. Okay, as homeowner of this unit, I am worried about what's going to be happening because of his proposal, the waiver and the concession. Not only that, the biggest problem that we're having is parking. He's mentioned parking, but only for his structure. But what about the rest of us? We have to park in the street, and then on Tuesdays, we have to move our car over to the other side because, as you know, most of us in this city have to drive more than 2 cars. So that means that our daughter's living with us, and she has to deal with us every Tuesday and Wednesday, moving the cars back and forth because of the parking. Now, because we are servicing our community, it's not only us that are worried about the parking, but it's also all those other buildings. I've seen people from across the street park on our side, on this side of the street. I've seen people from next door on the west side park on this side of the street or in that area. So it's what it is our parking. It is affecting our parking. How it says here that it doesn't, but it does. It affects all our parking. I've read this whole document, and not one piece ever says what will happen to the wall, that wall that's on the west side, even though we're on the east side, what will happen to that wall side of our building? What will happen to the parking? No, but no one ever talks about parking, except where it goes under their building. If damage is caused to our building by the constructing of this units, who's going to pay for that damage? Also, it is more traffic will be created by this unit. Now, if at the beginning, this has always been the issue, yes, 28 units can be built in there. Yes, you can provide the parking for that. But there would be left that parking that's in front of the oak tree. Right now, people are even parking in the section of the oak tree where it says it's only parking for people that are building on that are coming from those other buildings. They're parking on an area that says no, you cannot be parking there.
You're talking about the on-street parking?
Yes, the on-street parking. So with 28 units, the application is for 38 units, and those affordable housing, the findings were not, I'm going back to the findings, there were no findings on how those 3 low-income units would help, except for the parking, except for the grading of the land. It doesn't how it's going to help those people, and it doesn't say anything about the 2 waivers, how these waivers would help him build this humongous unit, keeping those things in mind. So this is my concern. My concern is that they keep it at 28 units, and if they are still doing the 3, they could keep those 3 out of the 28. The 3 units could be for low-income housing, and the other units, 25, could be for regular housing and also for regular parking, as it was presented before. And that is my complaint. My complaint is the parking.
Okay. Question for you.
Yes.
Property or the condominiums that you're living in, do you have parking or garage?
We have parking. That's why they stated it as a 3-story. It isn't a 3-story. It's a 2-story, and the 3rd story is parking provided for all the people.
And then the garages that you have, is it for 1 car, 2 car?
2-car garage.
Okay.
That's
All right.
why my husband and I have a car, but the third person is my daughter who's living with us. She's the one that has to deal with the parking in the street.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The next speaker I have is Soren Alexanian. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Thank you.
Please state your name and address.
Yeah, Soren Alexanian, 2809 Montrose Avenue, which is the condominium next door. I'm here representing the homeowner association. I spoke to the other board members, and we are opposed to this project as proposed. We are very concerned about the two modifications that are being recommended. I believe that